Hello and welcome to the Narc Alert. On Sundays, we like to step away from the narcs. So we'd like to welcome you to Sunday Stories, creepy, sleepy stories, designed to help you fall asleep, or maybe keep you awake. Thank you for joining us for another Sunday story. Tonight's creepy, sleepy tale is called Camper Van, and it's brought to us from the famous creepypasta website and the author, Emerald Lee. The camper van is there again, in the field behind my neighborhood. If I stand on the tips of my toes, I can just see it over the tall fence in my backyard. The white and red stripes along its side, its darkened windows. I used to work at a tiny dive of a bar in this tiny dive of a town. The owner of the bar, Jeb, decided to make the establishment's sign by hand. He fancies himself a craftsman, I suppose. So for a few years now, the already dumpy-looking building has boasted a huge plywood sign with a nail-gunned-on letters formed from sticks, the kind you'd use for kindling. Jeb's Place. The man's name is Jeb. Does it get any more hick than that? The only real benefit of living in a completely uneventful place where the population is lower than most city high schools is that even as a 19-year-old woman who worked until 3 in the morning at a bar called Jeb's Place, I could still walk home after a shift alone without encountering anything worse than a mangy stray cat. On one such night, after a particularly riveting shift listening to Frank McKinsley recount to me, for the 20th time this month, I've kept track, his woeful tale of bankruptcy and divorce and the damn thieving left-wingers, they're all homos, I left work as I always did, with a filched can of Bud stuffed in my coat pocket and a handful of peanuts wrapped in a napkin. I have a thing about walking on grass. I don't like it. I figure people invented sidewalks for a reason, and it's so we don't have to walk on mushy, unstable ground all the time like in the old days. But on that particular night, clutching my less than ideally cold beer, I was feeling restless. On that night, the frozen air expanded in my lungs and left steam, and I could see little crystals of water, not quite big enough to be snowflakes, all around me, glistening like winter, illuminated by our town's sparse street lamps, one of which was flickering and about to burn out. Maybe it was the quickly cracked and drained Bud, or maybe it was just that I had heard too many old-timer stories, or maybe just because I was a bored 19-year-old. But on that night, I thought, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to walk on grassy ground. I thought maybe the feeling of the frozen blades crunching beneath my sneakers would be a new, interesting sensation. So I took a different route home than usual. I cut through the field behind my neighborhood. When this place was a busier center of agriculture, in the 50s I guess, it had a school. It was a small school, only 300 kids from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. But the school had a track and a field program, mostly just to keep the teenagers out of trouble in a town with nothing much else to do besides exactly that. Shockingly, the track and field program required a field. No problem. Plenty of those around these parts. I started walking again, more cautiously than before, squinting ahead instead of down at my feet. I walked closer and closer to the thing in front of me. 142 steps, 143, 144. I could see once I finally got near to the shape in the field that it was indeed a vehicle. The camper van. Just sitting there, in the darkness, apparently abandoned. There didn't seem to be any tracks in the frosted grass from where it had been driven in. No sign that it had been moved there recently, and no indication that anyone had been around it, except for a sinking feeling in the core of my torso and that persistent warmth at the base of my skull, insisting irrationally, I knew, that something wasn't right, that something was wrong about that van. Now, I've seen a lot of movies. I mean, maybe not a lot, but I've seen my fair share. So I know how this scene goes. The dumbass character sees something sketchy and checks it out. And the mediocre piano score is banging out in the background. And the dummy on the screen is walking closer and closer to the sketchy thing and breathing heavily the whole time, like a big dummy, and someone in the theater or living room or wherever you're watching this horrible movie inevitably whispers, "Stop! Don't go over there!" And the scene always ends the same way, and the whole audience or living room party or whatever collectively breathes a frustrated sigh, as if they had no idea that this character would act like a big dummy. So, when I became the star dummy in my own sketchy situation, approaching a sketchy camper van, which apparently materialized in the middle of a field in the middle of this shithole of a town, I did what any sane person would do. I marched right up to that van, and I pulled on the handle of the passenger side door. And luckily, for my bimbo-headed self, it was locked. Regaining my sense of self-preservation rather abruptly, I backed away from the damn thing as if it was electrically charged, dropping all of my stupid peanuts on the ground. Turning to leave, I made a wide loop around the van and I pointed myself in the direction of the back entrance to the trailer park, hustling my arse faster than any arse has ever been hustled. I think I held my breath the whole way to my front porch. When I finally released the air trapped in my lungs, it came out like a wheeze, as if I were a pack-a-day smoker. I was shaking and fumbling with my house keys and panting, and when I finally got into the house, I slammed the door behind me and locked the deadbolt, promising silently to never, ever trust non-sidewalk walking again. Even then, I knew I was being ridiculous. Nothing had happened to me. I found a camper in a field in the middle of East Jesus Nowhere town, and as I said, kids have nothing to do except get into trouble. If someone was in that van, they were sleeping or high off their heads on weed from the Trailer Park Seniors Incorporated, or drunk, or some combination. I took a hot shower and I tried to forget about the whole thing, and without too much trouble I fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, or afternoon, the camper was gone. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't give it another thought for 3 years. I quit my job at Jeb's place only weeks after the incident. I got a college diploma in agriculture, like everyone does around here. And since graduating, I've been working as a farmhand at a local feedlot. I'm 22 and I haven't thought diddly squat about that camper van since the night I last saw it. But just seconds ago, in broad daylight, in the middle of summertime, I came outside to replace the suet in my bird feeder. I have a soft spot for sparrows, all right? And that's when I saw it. The damn thing is there. It's there in the field. And I'm getting that tingly feeling in my spine all over again, as if my prey drive is kicking in at the sight of a harmless old camper. 3 years, and that thing shows up looking just how it did the night I first saw it. The window in my bedroom is open, and I can hear the TV from outside. In other news, the grandson of a former Rebel Telephones engineer discovered new evidence yesterday that might be able to solve a 45-year-old mystery involving the bizarre death of a young woman. I reason with myself that nothing bad can happen in broad daylight. So I finish replacing the suet and I hoist myself over the fence as the news anchor's voice drifts from my room. Pages contain evidence that the cell phone company was conducting unique experiments. Forgetting all inhibitions about non-sidewalk travel, I start walking toward the van. As I'm moving toward the ridiculous vehicle, I ignore every inch of my body that's begging me to turn back. My heart is pounding. My temple's sweating. I wipe my pawns off my cut-off jean shorts, feeling the lump of my phone in my pocket. As I get closer to the thing, I can see the make and model, details I couldn't grasp in the darkness 3 years ago. It's a Dodge Tradesman from the 70s, a totally generic holiday vehicle for a totally generic middle-income family. It is completely unthreatening. And yet, I'm terrified. The weather is warm, it's almost hot, but I'm shivering. I make a wide circle around the front of the tradesman, keeping my eyes on the tacky floral curtains in its windows, tracing almost my exact path but in reverse of the night that I walked home from Jeb's place 3 years ago. I'm directly in front of the passenger side door and no one seems to be in the vehicle, so I step forward. I look down and I move my foot away from whatever I stepped on. There, nestled in the grass right next to the van, is a small pile of peanuts and a crumpled napkin. Just like what I was carrying the night of my first encounter. I bend down and I take a few of the crushed peanuts into my sweating palm. This doesn't make any sense. Surely these can't have been in the field for 3 years. I lift up the napkin to get a better look, and it's almost... Suddenly, inexplicably, the van lurches and I fall to my knees. Scrambling back to the front, I try to wrench open the passenger door, but it's stuck. I crawl over and I try the driver's side, but it's stuck too. The locks are in the unlocked position. This doesn't make any sense. Why won't they open? The van gives another lurch and I'm thrown into the upright back of the driver's seat. Clutching to the old-fashioned steering wheel for balance, the van continues to lurch back and forth like it's being rocked by some large force from behind. The windows are darkening like the sunset on a fast-forward. The van is shaking, shuddering, lurching, almost tipping over, and a buzzing pressure is shoving into on my eardrums. I feel a warm trickle slide down the side of my face from my left ear. I'm so dizzy and my lungs can't seem to grab air, like my ribs are collapsing. I'm trying to scream, but all I can do is open my mouth and struggle to inhale. Try to open my hands to open the door again, but I can't concentrate. I'm blind with panic and my fingers won't open. They're stuck clutching the steering wheel, with my knuckles are turning white. I feel like I'm being pushed into the seat and I'm squeezing the steering wheel so hard that I can feel the tiny bones in each of my fingers stressing. There's a great pressure on my hands and my head and everywhere. My kneecaps feel like they're being jammed into my shins. I have to stop squeezing this steering wheel or else... I can't scream. I can't even make a sound as the pointer finger knuckle of my right hand abruptly snaps and bursts through the skin. The ring finger follows with a tiny burst of a blood vessel. Somewhere in my left ear it explodes and there's a crunch and a snap somewhere near my right knee. I can feel the burning, numbing pain spreading through every part of me. My vision goes red and the van is still shuddering, lunging back and forth. There's a final violent thrust of the van and a great sizzling pressure over my whole body, and then... nothing. In other news, the grandson of a former Rebel Telephones engineer discovered new evidence yesterday that might be able to solve a 45-year-old mystery involving the death of a young woman. Here's Melanie Reynolds with the details. Thank you, Jackie. In March of 1971, the body of a woman in her early 20s was discovered near Rebel Laboratories building in New York. A positive ID was never secured for the woman, and no missing person reports were filed that matched her description. She had several injuries on her hands, and she seemed to have died of a massive brain hemorrhage. Even more mysterious was her clothing, which was made of materials that forensic experts at the time could not identify. While the woman's death was ruled suspicious, no suspects were ever arrested in connection with the incident. Yesterday morning, Ben Matthews found a journal that his grandfather had kept during his employment at Rebel in the 1970s. The journal's pages contain evidence that the telephone company had been conducting unique experiments in fields such as teleportation and time travel, which seemed to involve the use in some capacity of a Dodge Tradesman camper van. Yes, you heard that correctly. Time travel experiments with a camper van. Some speculate that such experiments could account for Rebel's sudden declaration of bankruptcy in the early 1980s. A source tells us that one portion of the journal reads, "The woman was dead when she arrived in the Tradesman. and that it mentions a strange device in the woman's pocket which resembled a telephone. Although we cannot be sure if the woman mentioned in the journal and the woman found near the rebel building are the same, we can be certain from the content of the pages that the company was experimenting with more than mobile phone development, and police say they will be conducting a full investigation of the claims made in the book. Although former Motorola engineer Martin Cooper is credited with the successful development of the first mobile phone in 1973, it is well known that workers at Rebel were developing similar technologies during the same time, and that information and blueprints often leaked between the two companies. Some theories are already circulating which try to link the mysterious woman in the journal and her strange device to Rebel's attempts at mobile phone development. Back to you, Jackie. Thank you, Melanie. Sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Now, over to Cal for sports. Mac Donahue was walking his dogs in the field behind his neighborhood when Ginger, his dog he had adopted just a week earlier, sprinted off and snuffed eagerly at something in the grass. Frightened by recent stories of dog poisonings, Mac jogged over shouting, "No, Ginger, drop it. Don't eat it." When he got to where she had been sniffing, he found only a small pile of peanuts and a slobbery napkin. "Damn litterers," Mac muttered. He pulled Ginger away by her collar and shooed other dogs from the garbage, and then he continued on his peaceful summer walk, reveling in the uneventfulness of his quaint little town. Well, that's another creepy story from creepypasta.com. Thank you again to Aaron Mick, or Emerald Lee, who is the author. Thank you for joining me for another creepy, sleepy story. We'll be back on Tuesday with a non-Amber Narc alert. Until then, be kind and hasta luego.